Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Ready or Not. So, this movie was convenient for me to just watch, so I just conveniently did so. Uh, really, I think right now this movie is available on like Vudu or Amazon for you to rent, but by and large, you can go into a number of apps that I've used over a long stretch of time. Google search them probably easily and go through certain apps like Letters See Movies. You could also go and Google search like Fox HD movies, where the logo will say so, but the title will say something different. It'll be like Play 1080p. If you go and search movie apps right here to the second of this recording, you can probably find an app that says like Play HD or something like that, and that's kind of the equivalent of Fox HD movies. The logo will say that it'll be like Play HD or something, and you can go into that app and have like a Fox HD equivalent where you can basically watch anything for absolutely free. Because it's pretty much straightforward, the exact same app, but called something differently, as if someone like took that whole entire app and just put it out there twice. Um, you could also possibly go on to an app called TV Crush that might have certain movies that those two other apps might not, but that's a very rare thing. So, with that said, how did I feel about Ready or Not? I think the first time around, this is a really fun movie. It's a very simplistic like concept where you have a person who is to be married into a family, and bizarrely, that married person has to go and randomly pick a card of seemingly a number of certain games, like Old Maid or checkers or chess or something like that. And supposedly, from all of those games, the common game like Old Maid and whatever, it doesn't really matter if you win or not. It just matters that you played it. But I guess there is to be one simple game that you should not get out of all the cluster of games. And so it's kind of like a would you rather kind of situation. It's like, well, would you rather play this game or would you rather not get married into this family? So the funny thing is, like the characters that are presented from this entire family, we find out a lot of them are just these like really rich people that are to not give a single F about anything. Even at some point, some people are married into this family and they're simply married into it for the money and they don't give about anything else. So the funny thing that we find out with this film is that everyone is to have these very goofy, weird, old-fashioned weapons, and not a lick of any of them could really use them. Because I guess they just realized that, oh, like this card won't come up, this game won't come up. But here's the thing that bothers me, because technically, when looking at it, lives are on the line, and these people could not be bothered to take up a crossbow lesson uh, or a bowing lesson when their lives could quite possibly be on the line, so to speak. Because we find out that there's a lot more in stake than just one person's life in other people's hands. So this, of course, is a game that is to, of course, be hide and go seek, or hide and seek. That the bride, of course, is to pick. And so the funny thing of life that is to be held in the order of things is that the bride is to either have to forcibly get killed by some weird, goofy ritual by the end of this night, or the entire family that she had been wedded into was to have all gotten killed off all simultaneously in one fell swoop. And so really we have this family who is to kind of question. It's like, well, do we really have to kill this girl? Is it really going to have the whole entire family die off if we do not kill this girl by dawn? Like, is this all really and truly going to happen? And so on and so forth. And there's also questions because weirdly this house has cameras displayed all over the house for whatever goofy reason. Um, but yeah, so the thing that I have to say about this movie is like it seems that at first they actually stick to the whole hide and seek kind of concept, but then it seems the later and later we go on in this movie, they kind of give that up, and it starts to just seem like this girl just has to avoid getting killed by any random number of family member, which it seems that Daniel in this movie, who's played by Adam Brody, which I thoroughly love, uh, Adam Brody, just because of the consistent, like whenever he is to be a person in a film, normally his character sticks out. It's always the thing. Um, and I always just think that Adam Brody always picks the right character to do, simply because he always is to have the character that sticks out the most. Even so much so that it seems like Daniel is to be like a better helping kind of person to our main character Grace than her own husband does, Alex, which is kind of sad to say, but it's true. So going into this film, there are certain characters that I really do enjoy. Like we have Finch's character, who we see on the very bottom there, that of course is to have never fired a crossbow in his life. So desperately he is to go on some YouTube video to see how to even use a crossbow, because like for anybody, nobody knows how to use any of these weapons, and so hence the complete mistakes that they are consistently to make in this film. And so yeah, so with that said, I think that's all I want to say about this film. It's a fun film, but I think it's also, the more and more you watch it, the more and more you start to pull it apart and just realize, like, you know what, like this is like so goofy, and how the fact that these people were to like to just be like their lives were on the line, and and technically their lives are on the line, but really it's just to like it's a whole family against one girl. You would thought that this game would have been quickly wrapped up, would have been quickly done. But more and more we just see that this Grace girl is utterly defiant, to where even the father at one point is like, how is it that she's getting away from us? How is it that she can conveniently keep doing this? And so that's the interesting part about this story. So let's go out of our way to go into that double five, because let's otherwise say that it is spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about the time I'm going to spoil this movie. So Grace and Alex are to, of course, get married. And it seems that there are times when Alex is going to Grace, and like there's these times where it's like, hey, we don't have to get married. Like, hey, we can just kind of like run off together. And because Alex was, I guess, a guy who was to run off from this family because at some point they were to every year, I guess, sacrifice goats and hail Satan and whatever. And so Alex was to immediately think that that shouldn't be considered the norm, but they do that seemingly every year. So going on into this film, Grace and Alex get married. They get married like right where this home is to be held. So they end up getting married, and so it seems like you would think that both Grace and Alex would be cementing their marriage, And so, but instead, Alex is just say it's like, well, Grace, like, since my family is to be this creator of games, and I guess they have amassed a fortune because of it, Grace, we have to have you go and play one game to kind of cement that you are a part of this family now. And so Grace is like, okay, like, what's the stakes? What happens if I win? What happens if I lose? And Alex is just like, well, like, you just have to play. And so Grace is just like, okay, all right, that seems a little weird. And Alex is like, yeah, I know, I get it. It does seem really weird. You would have thought that Alex would have honestly told Grace, like, kind of the heads up kind of thing. But even when Grace does technically get the card that you shouldn't be getting, Alex still doesn't give Grace much of a heads up that possibly there could be death in store for her if she is to pull a certain card. Plus, also, when really looking at it, Grace and Alex, if they retie themselves back onto this family afterwards, if all this is to, well, technically, I guess when really looking at it, Grace wouldn't have retied herself onto this family anyways, but still. Uh, like, say, for example, if she was to have gotten, like, some goofy card, like Twister or Old Maid or whatever, if Grace was to have gotten any other card and then been into this family and someone else would have gotten married and someone else would have pulled that card, would Grace have gone on to kill somebody? I'd like to think no. So we have these people all get around this table, and so they end up divulging who was to get who kind of game. Finch, I guess, was to have gotten Old Maid, and he doesn't even know what the heck that even was, and so on and so forth. So Grace, of course, is to pull this card out of this weird magic box of a machine, and she's like, "Oh, I pulled hide and seek," and she's like, "Oh, what does that mean?" And so they're like, "Oh, well, you have to just go and hide, and we have to go and find you. Simple enough." And so Grace has to go and hide wherever she is to hide within this house, and is to hide there till dawn. Like, not in one specific place, just not be found by this whole entire family until dawn. So Grace is to notice that there's cameras all over the house, and immediately she goes and talks to Tony and says, like, well, isn't that a little bit of an unfair advantage for you to, you have cameras all over this house? Isn't it going to be a little bit difficult? And so Tony's like, oh, no, we're not going to even use these cameras, like, during this whole thing. And so that way we can make it even. So Grace is like, okay. It's like, why do you even have a house that has cameras all over it anyways? Like, very distrusting, I guess. So Grace is to go on and hide in this one little small elevator-like thing. And then she is to just be like, man, like, how did you spend your wedding day, Grace? Well, I hid into a little elevator and just stayed there for the whole night. You would have thought that maybe, considering this family would have probably never have found her, and like, it seemed like she was in there for a good while where no one was to spot her. You would have thought that they would have gone, like, she would have possibly fell asleep because maybe she's a light sleeper, and then, like, no one would have found her, and then so we have her just kind of waiting in this little elevator. And the funny thing is that later on she goes back into that small little elevator to find that there is someone else in there. And so sadly, Grace ends up accidentally having to kill this woman because like she's one of the maids, and so everyone is just basically trying to kill Grace. Slowly but surely, we end up starting to see certain babysitters or certain maids or whatever starting to one by one get killed. Because accidentally, while Grace was to go on and get out of this little elevator shaft like thing, she walks out of there, and then Alex is to go and grab her and is to take her into a room where accidentally uh, we have Emily who shoots one of the maids by accident because one of the maids is just kind of like singing this song, making her way through the house. And so Emily shoots her. And so that's when Grace is to realize there's death on the line here and that someone is going to have to die. It is kind of funny because Daniel is to come in there and is just to see this dead body there. And so Daniel is like, well, hey, technically we did kill somebody here. Does that sacrifice still count? And Tony's like, no, it has to be the person that pulled the card. So no matter how many maids that you kill, like, it doesn't count. So going on. So Tony is to try and get Grace through kind of hidden passages and little places through this home, and trying to help her at first try and hide away. But Grace goes more and more through this house, and so when Grace is to talk to Alex, it's like, how come you didn't tell me any of this? Because Alex just mentioned that if this were a thing that she would have pulled, like, more than likely Grace would have left. Grace would have not, if Grace would have known, Grace would have not gotten married to him, because there is that risk of her dying. So I can technically understand that. Plus, also, if Alex was to probably tell Grace this story, Grace would probably not have believed Alex. So just like, what now? Like, I don't believe you. You sound crazy. I'm getting out of here. So we go on and we have Grace kind of just stumbling through the home. And so Alex is to go through to make it to the camera room to kind of just watch where Grace is. So Grace starts going through the house and is to, of course, make it into a room where Daniel is coincidentally in. Daniel, of course, is to not want to kill Grace, and so he is to just be like, "Hey, you want a drink? Like, I'll give you a 10-second head start. Like, I'll I have to call out that you're in here, but like I'll give you like an opportunity here." So Grace is trying to bargain with Daniel, and Daniel's like, "I'm sorry, like I'm gonna try to do the best that I can, but like you also have to die. You have to, or it entails that the whole family will get killed by dawn." So Daniel is to, of course, run off and say that that Grace is in the study, and so Daniel's wife is to come in, who is, of course, to be Charity, and is to say that she would rather die than lose all of this, and that evidently Charity had come from nothing, and so like being a part of this game is just easy for her. But Charity is also getting really annoyed because everyone has these goofy weapons that they can't even use, to the point of Charity just saying like, well, why can't I just use my gun? Like, I have a gun on me. And they're just like, no, the tradition is the tradition, because we have certain weird kind of paintings of, I guess, these people being hunters traditionally, and I'm sure that they would hunt every single kind of animal out there. Hence why you have so many weird and goofy guns and stuff like that that are to be throughout this whole entire house. So we, at some point, seem to consistently have both Grace at odds with Stevens through bulk of this movie, where we get Grace going on and finding some weird, goofy gun. And so Stevens is in this kitchen going and making some kind of food of sorts and listening to some operatic like music, which he seems to consistently be enjoying. So this guy is getting really into this whole classic music like thing. And so Grace is cocking this gun. And so Grace is to jump in front of Stevens, trying to figure out a way freaking out of here. And so the gun is to go off, and there isn't actual legitimate bullets in this gun. So that leaves both Grace and Steven fighting it out forcibly, to where Grace goes and has to now burn Steven with the pot of food that he was making. And so Stevens is now burnt. Grace heads out of the building and just starts making her way outside of the building to head into certain kind of barns, or just kind of make her way out of the home's fencing to try and hope that she can go and find some car and hitch her way back to wherever she is going to go next to get the heck out of here. So when Grace is to make it to this barn, it seems that there is to be some kid there. And so Grace is to just be like, oh, hey, kid, hi, yeah. So all of a sudden, we find this young kid who has this gun on him and ends up shooting Grace. And she ends up falling over into this, or she ends up going over into this seemingly place where they have hidden all these dead bodies. And to where it seems like there is going to eventually be more bodies to be chucked in there. So Grace is to now go on and trying to desperately get out of this place that has this body dumped like thing. And so now she is to wrap up her hand that is to now get, of course, wounded by this gunshot. So eventually, I think Daniel and Emily are to make it down to where this kid was, and he explained what happened. And so they're like, oh, okay. So Grace ends up going off to make it through this fence while cutting her back open pretty good. And blah, 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 blah. Yay, another scam call. Aren't those great? Doesn't everybody just love those? When especially they have to happen multiple times in one day, because these people just don't realize that no means no, or like, hey, stop calling me. Just go ahead and just stop calling me. But anyways, pushing on. So Grace is to be just kind of captured into a fence, and so she cuts herself to get out of it. And there is to be some car where she is to wave down. And, God. And so Grace is to, of course, have this person just drive on by. And he's like, God. She's like, God, freaking rich people. Like, they're not helpful. If anything, they're just going to put you down and whatever. So Grace just starts to, I guess, make her way like beyond this house, like as far as she can possibly get, as far as she can possibly get. But she just consistently keeps bumping into this family no matter what she does, even to the point where Stevens is to go and drive around and find where Grace is and is to drag her back uh, into this house by kind of knocking her out. And so Stevens is to think like, oh yeah, like I knocked her out, and so I'm gonna go and start blaring music again because I feel like I've done this. Yeah, I feel so good. So Stevens is now having a video conversation with this family, and they're like, yeah, like he did it. Like yeah, high five everybody. Like Stevens did it. And so Stevens is feeling so confident. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna go listen to music. So all of a sudden, Grace is to wake up, and so Grace is to easily take Stevens down if not all the maids are being killed. And now, like, Grace is figuring out a way to kill Stevens in this point, to where Tony is just like, good God, like, this woman's like Rambo. Like, this woman is to just take everyone out. Like, what the is going on? So Grace is to have to forcibly make it back into the place of which that is to be this housing like environment. So they of course need to figure out where the car was to be parked first, and so again, Grace is to bump into Daniel again. And so Daniel is like, well, hey, like, you just made it to my favorite spot. Like, you just made it to the spot where I would where I'd try to get away from all this. And so Grace is to again ask Daniel, like, please don't do this, please don't, whatever. And like Daniel is just like, you know, I have to do this. Like, you know, like it's not it's not something I absolutely want to do, but it's something I have to do. So all of a sudden Tony is to make her way or make his way to um, seeing where Grace is because he was hiding behind some tree. And so they go on and they go to like take Grace out and drag her into the house. So what happens is that they go and they realize that Alex is in the camera room. And so what they go on to do is they take Alex, get him out of the camera room, and they handcuff him to this one bed. And so now Becky, who is Alex's mother, is to have a conversation with him about all this. And so Alex is to mention, it's like, well, hey, if you kill my wife, like, I'm going to kill you. And so Becky is just like, well, I guess there's not much of a win-win scenario for me here. Like, either way, I'm going to die. And so Becky is to, like, ask, it's like, why Alex ran away. Like, why Alex ran away from this family. And Alex was, of course, to say the moment where it's like, well, like, I don't know about you, but when I have a family that is to just murder people and slaughter goats every year, like, I just don't feel that that's quite normal. Like, I don't feel like that's a family that, like, is to do something that normally is to be a thing to do. So, but Becky is just like, well, it's the whole tradition of things. And Alex is just like, no. So, what eventually ends up happening is Alex is to kind of use his cuffs to try to break away from this bed. And you would think that Alex at some point would be going out of his way to help Grace once he breaks out of this bed. But the more and more, like, I think Alex starts to realize that Alex could quite possibly die if he, as well as a number of his family, if Grace doesn't. So, because we have, of course, uh, Aunt Helene, who I guess was to have killed her husband in the very beginning of this film. We end up seeing this flashback of younger variations of certain characters. And so Aunt Helene was to, I guess, had her husband pull this card, which led to his death. And so she was to say that, like, well, hey, if I didn't go on to kill my own husband, then like we would have all have died years before this. So every person who is to have their groom or bride be one way or another put in this family has to go and kill their new spouse. It's just the way things go. So they go and they try to put together this ritual, and so we end up having seemingly them putting this whole thing together. And so Grace is now on this table, and so what ends up happening is Alex is to go on and like go and grab the knife and decide to be a part of this ritual. And so Alex is to go on and stab Grace, but he ends up like stabbing her in almost like the shoulder. And so Grace figures out a way to try and get away from all these people, and is to just stretch out more time and to try to like find a place in this room where she can kind of not be attacked by all these people. And so all of a sudden dawn is arriving. Dawn is coming up. And so now Aunt Helene is to realize, or Helene is to realize that dawn has approached. That she pushes out the curtains to realize that dawn has all arrived, and weirdly, every single family member is to seem to turn in like a vampire. Weirdly, to just say, "Oh, the sun's gonna kill us!" Like they're all vampires. Like they're all gonna turn into dust because of the sun. And so they go on, and they're like, "Wait a minute. Like, we're not dead yet. Like, what's going on? Like, is it not true? Is the curse all a lie? Oh, like, what a relief." So, all of a sudden, one by one, this family starts exploding, and we're all just like, what the heck is going on? Like, wait a minute, like, who got shot? Like, who put any kind of explosives in these people's drink? Because what had happened was Daniel had gone on to the drink that everyone was drinking from had gotten poisoned by Daniel, and so all of them started to get really sick. And so that's where Daniel was to free Grace after her getting stabbed in the shoulder. And so Daniel is to try and help Grace run off. And Daniel ends up getting killed for his trouble. And Grace is to thank Daniel for what he had done to help her. So Alex and Grace seem to run off, but then eventually Alex is to realize that he needs to have Grace come back and do this whole do this whole performance, so that way she can get killed. And so that's when dawn is to arrive. So everybody starts exploding, everyone in this family. They, of course, don't want to show the kids exploding, so they kind of do that off screen conveniently, because there are two kids that are on the side of Emily. So everybody just starts going off and exploding, and some people are to kind of say their last things. It's kind of really upset that they had been involved in a family that has this kind of thing going on. Or a lot of people are just kind of baffled or confused about what is actually going on here. So everybody just starts to explode. And so Alex is the only one left where I guess he's to possibly think if he is to go and kill Grace right here now, that maybe like he can still survive. So we have Grace who decides to divorce Alex from this family. And you would have thought it would have been interesting if Grace would have still died by the end of this. To just be like, oh, well, she would have, because technically she's part of the family. So what if Grace would have still died and exploded at the end of this movie? But so Grace is to say that she wants a divorce from Alex and that she's done with his family. And she's done with him. And so she walks out of the house that is now bizarrely burning down. And so all of a sudden, all these police come, all of these paramedics come, weirdly, coincidentally, at the end of this movie, to all of a sudden ask Grace, hey, are you hurt? Like, are you okay? Like, what's the problem here? And Grace is to say, in-laws. So that's the way the movie is to finish up. That's the way we are to finish up this review. I think I'm going to get the heck out of here. Fun movie, but again, you start to see the goofy problems that are with this movie, where everybody's lives are to be on the line, and nobody knows how to be able to defend themselves against this girl. No offense, but like nobody planned. Nobody in this house, like, I guess, planned ahead of time for this to have ever happened, because technically if they're realizing by the night it's long that their lives are on the line, and you would think that that this card could have came up. But we also have that hide and seek song consistently playing throughout the movie, because I guess they had to figure out some kind of song that they could have played during this thing. But kind of liked that. Kind of was an enjoyable thing to just kind of find some kind of song to kind of tie into this whole Ready or Not movie. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.